It shouldn't be a surprise that Nintendo chose Mario Kart World as the launch title of the Nintendo Switch 2. Mario Kart 8 was one of the best-selling games of all time, and Mario Kart World is bigger in every way. Sure, it only has 30 proper tracks, but it also has over 200 intermission tracks, or as I like to call them, routes. These routes are the defining characteristic of this game, much like how the anti-grav defined Mario Kart 8, and how the Honey Queen defined Mario Kart 7. And whether you like it or not, these routes are going to define Mario Kart World discourse for, well, probably forever. See, routes do some things really, really well, and I think they're great, but at the same time, I don't think this game handles these routes as elegantly as it needs to. It's a brilliant idea, yes, but the execution leaves a lot to be desired. From the beginning, this game was envisioned as having a large, interconnected world where players could drive from one track to another seamlessly. This open world is where the title comes from, though I think some of us would have preferred Mario Kart Walkable City. The free roam mode of this game might seem like the obvious way to experience this Mario Kart world, but I see free roam more as a fun side mode where you stumble through the woods foraging for P-switches. If you're exploring, you're probably combing every inch of Hyrule, rather than trying to speed from one course to the next. The routes, on the other hand, are a much stronger expression of this interconnected world idea. Driving from one course to another allows players to appreciate the scenery, without losing the core high-octane gameplay that Mario Kart is built on. As you play different routes, you'll eventually develop a sense of how each track relates to its surrounding environment. The scenery is diverse and interesting, and often you'll find yourself arriving at your destination before you even realize you're in a new place. The connections between tracks feel logical and natural, which reflects this fantastic sense of level design. You also get a strong sense of momentum from experiencing the world in this way. When you're racing across the country and see the next track drawing closer, it feels like you're actually going somewhere. There's this sense of adventure that permeates everything, as though we've broken free of the boundaries of old Mario Kart and are blazing a new trail through uncharted territory. Well, about as uncharted as it gets when there's a Yoshi selling burgers from his food truck just around the bend. But I guess that just goes to show that Mario Kart's world is a busy place. And the routes do a lot to add to this feeling. They make the world feel richer and more fleshed out, as though there's always something new to see just around the corner. Which brings me around to perhaps the greatest thing about routes: the insane amount of variety they bring to this game. There are over 200 routes, and while I haven't played every single one quite yet, it's astonishing how many interesting details they've packed into these things. Maybe not every route is a certified banger, but quite a few of these feature unique enemies or obstacles that wouldn't be out of place on a standard track. Sure, maybe the routes are simpler, but they really aren't the straight, cisgender lines that the Republican Party would have you believe. Throw in dynamic weather and a day-night cycle, and it feels like this game has enough content to keep players coming back for years. So the idea behind routes is brilliant. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the routes themselves are brilliant. But no good thing exists in a vacuum, and the way this game implements these routes leaves something to be desired. Our first issues arise in Grand Prix mode. Grand Prix is the starting point for most players, but this mode doesn't give the main tracks the respect they deserve. Instead, it puts a jarring amount of emphasis on the connecting routes, at the unfortunate expense of the main tracks, which are, you know, the stars of the show. You've been looking forward to Toad's Factory? How's about we spend 2/3 of the race driving to Toad's Factory, and then do one quick lap at the end, eh? You're excited to play on the new Starview Peak? Well, you can have a little peek, if you do a route first. Dry Bones Burnout seems really cool, just don't get burnout from this extra long route you have to play first. Don't get me wrong, it's cool how each cut feels like you're Mario Kart touring a chunk of the map, but in most cases you spend more time on the open road than you spend on the actual racetrack. By the time you reach the main event, you're already on the last lap, which is barely enough time to enjoy the dynamic new scenery. The implementation is also super inconsistent. In the first track of the cup, which is typically one of the game's easier tracks, you'll race a full 3 laps, or 5 if it's Koopa Troopa Park. Races 2 through 4 will start with a connecting route, which means you'll spend a lot of time driving to the next course. And when you get there, you race around the circuit one time, and the race is over. I suppose there's some merit to the idea of these routes being treated as a build-up for the climactic final lap, but that final lap will almost always fall short. Take a track like Bowser's Castle. The approach is awesome, and it's easy to get excited to see how they handled the track this time around. But once you get there, you get hit with a confusing maze of twists and turns and, oh, it's already over. No time to master the track or even get a sense for where the finish line is supposed to be. And don't tell me to check the mini-map that's right there on screen. I refuse to use maps or ask for directions. I am a confident, self-assured man, and I know where I'm going. It feels really anticlimactic. Normally, the final lap of a race will play a quicker, frantic version of the track's theme to indicate that we've hit the final lap. When you're playing a route, the music does change to the standard version of the track's theme. There's no urgency here, no sense of time to lock in. If it's your first time on a track, it's going to feel small and underwhelming because you barely got a chance to experience it. And if it's a track you remember from the previous game, well, of course it's going to be disappointing. One lap of your favorite course is always going to feel less exciting than the 3-lap races you remember. Also, if you're not familiar with a new track, it can be hard to tell where the route ends and the track begins. I guess that means the designers did a good job integrating the track into the world, but I think it also muddies up each track's unique identity, especially when it's the first time you're encountering it. The route to Dino Dino Jungle is 4 sections long, and the 3rd section has you driving through a jungle area with dinosaurs, but don't be fooled. That's just a regular old Dino Jungle. Dino Dino Jungle is the part where you drive through the Dino Dino Laboratory. Faraway Oasis sticks out as the safari-themed track, but the wild animals walking on the road only exist in the lead-up route. It feels like they should be a part of the main course, right? But no, they're spectating. I guess it's a good thing that the animals are safe and out of the way of oncoming traffic, but the result is a track that feels like it's lacking whatever unique elements might give it some staying power. The first time you play DK Spaceport in Grand Prix, you'll notice that the route is 8 segments long. How is a new player supposed to interpret that? Is it a long route to get to the track, or will we do multiple laps when we get there? Turns out the route is pretty normal, but DK Spaceport is a 1-lap track divided into 6 segments. But if you're like me, you'll be halfway up the course before you realize that this is the course. Lastly, I want to draw some attention to Dandelion Depths, a track that didn't draw any attention from me in my first playthrough. After 2 segments of a route, I'd forgotten what the track's gimmick was supposed to be, and the first half of this course is a pretty uninspiring construction theme. The Dandelion Depths, the biome we are here to see, are underground and get about 30 seconds of screen time. This is a brand new track, and it barely has a chance to make an impression, partly because the routes don't know how to build up to an underground biome, and partly because the routes steal precious driving time that could have been reserved for the track itself. These are small complaints. Once you've played each track a couple of times, you'll know what to expect, so you can better appreciate the division between the route and the track. But first impressions matter a lot, and with Grand Prix being the most straightforward way to experience the new content, routes are going to feel like the default version of these courses, despite the fact that the full tracks can be played without the routes in versus mode. It doesn't help that the routes don't feel rewarding the way Mario Kart tracks typically do. The routes are generally wide and straightforward, with an open design that focuses less on driving techniques and more on managing items and dodging traffic. Ramps, rails, and off-roading keep the routes interesting, but they don't have the tight level design that makes the standard courses stand out. While each route ends with 1 lap of a standard course, it's hard to feel mastery over a track when you only get to play 1 lap of it. There's a reason 3-lap circuits work so well. The first lap is about seeing what the course has to offer. The second is about honing your skills. And the third is where you demonstrate mastery of what you've learned. Even on a track you've played 100 times before, replaying a track should still give the player a feeling of remastery, reminding yourself the ins and outs of every track and letting your experience culminate in the final lap. Routes don't give this feeling of mastery. Not only are you not playing on the main track for most of the race, but the ideas don't really build either. Sure, there are cool moments in the routes, but they're all to give the player a smooth transition from one biome to the next. Weaving through traffic isn't somehow preparing you for Toad's factory. Sliding down icy slopes has nothing to do with Sky High Sundae. Crossing the moat outside Boo Cinema is interesting, but it's not like the moat mechanic is part of the level. There are exceptions. The route to Whistle Stop has you driving through a train yard and riding on rails. But routes that actually build up the next track's idea are something of a rare treat. And even then, these elements usually won't show up until the second half of the route. Tracks in Grand Prix just don't give the player that feeling of mastery that is inherent to traditional Mario Kart gameplay. How are you supposed to master Wario Shipyard if you only get one lap of Wario Shipyard? As it stands, the tracks in Grand Prix feel disappointing. The route leading up to the main course should feel like an appetizer, but they're treating the main course more like a dessert. And it would be a really simple fix. Just give us an extra lap. The routes can stay the same, but once we get to the track, we need a chance to enjoy it. Give us a first lap to orient ourselves, and then a second, final lap to show off our mastery. Sure, that's going to make a 4-segment track out of a 3-segment track, but I know I wouldn't mind another 90 seconds of gameplay in exchange for a more satisfying ending. There's also an issue with replayability. Routes are at their best when they're adding variety to the gameplay, but we don't really see that in Grand Prix. No matter how many times you choose the Shell Cup, you're still going to be playing the same 3 routes between courses. The path from Koopa Troopa Beach is an unshakable part of the Faraway Oasis Grand Prix experience, but the routes are simple. They don't ask for skill or memorization. Nobody is grinding out the path from Dry Bones Burnout to Moo Moo Meadows just in case it shows up in online versus mode. I don't subscribe to the notion that all routes feel the same, but I do think that playing the same route over and over again sort of defeats the purpose. There are 200 routes in this game, but if you spend all of your time in Grand Prix mode, you'll never see more than 30 of them. And if you're trying to get a perfect score on each cup, you'll be replaying those 30 routes again and again until you get tired of them. But the Grand Prix isn't where the routes really shine. The Knockout Tour is, in my opinion, the true star of Mario Kart World. Maybe they did go into this game with the starting goal of having one big interconnected map, but free roam is too slow and open-ended to really capitalize on this concept. Knockout Tour lets players experience the full breadth of the map in a high-octane, chaotic game of survival. This mode lets you see the world through new eyes, taking paths that the Grand Prix wouldn't even have suggested. The concept of Knockout Tour is really appealing to me. With its fine balance between luck, skill, and resource management, it captures the addictive feeling of a modern battle royale. But after playing a few rounds, I started to get bored. Not bored of the gameplay exactly, but more so bored of the scenery, which feels counterintuitive, right? We're racing on the routes, which are supposed to make the world feel diverse and exciting, but it didn't feel diverse and exciting. I felt like I was retreading the same ground over and over, because I was. Knockout Tour is way more limited than you might expect. There are only 8 possible rallies, 8 possible starting routes that will always lead into the exact same sequence of locations. There are a total of 40 routes represented in Knockout Tour, but when you're starting in the same few places over and over, it gets exhausting. You could start at Boo Cinema, drive to Starview Peak, get knocked out, and then start at Boo Cinema again for your next rally. And when only a few people get knocked out each round, the first few routes start to feel less like a competitive war and more like a repetitive chore. But given the nature of a battle royale, you are going to lose more often than you win, which means you'll be seeing the same few starting routes even more frequently than you might think. Back when I didn't know what to expect, I didn't mind getting kicked out early. Who cares about winning? Starting a new rally felt like starting somewhere fresh. But now that I know how few rallies there are, I hesitate to play this mode at all, as some of these routes have already overstayed their welcome. Remember, the routes are way simpler than the main tracks. They're meant to be straightforward transitions from one location to the next. They're not interesting enough to want to play over and over until you've mastered it, but that's what this game is asking you to do. The same rallies over and over, starting in the same 8 places and ending with the same 8 tracks. It's especially annoying when Knockout Tour isn't really about being the best racer. It's about getting lucky with item pulls and staying out of trouble until the end. It's monotonous. But it doesn't have to be. There are over 200 routes in this game. That means there are hundreds of potential starting points for a good Knockout Tour, and countless permutations of route combinations. And yet, despite setting themselves up to give players endless cross-country racing, they went with 8 rallies, which are chosen entirely at random when you play online. I don't know if they had technological limitations or if they're planning on giving us new rallies in future DLC, but what we have now is severely underwhelming. It's especially disappointing when you remember that there are 140 connecting routes that aren't represented in either Grand Prix or Knockout Tour. The only way to race on them is in Versus mode, where I can't help but feel the missed opportunity. Why can't I pre-select a few of my favorite tracks and play the routes between them, like my own customized Grand Prix? Sure, I can emulate it by manually selecting the routes I want between each race, but it's not quite as seamless as one might have hoped. Also, how is anyone supposed to choose a route when there's 200 routes to choose from? Well, the solution is choosing the connected course selection option. If you choose connected, the game gives you 3 options for routes that start at the track you just finished. It seems needlessly limited, given that most tracks connect to at least 5 others, but racing on connected versus tracks is probably the best way to discover new routes. It would still be nice if these tracks ended with 2 laps instead of just 1, but if you're looking for some variety, this is the best way to get it. And Nintendo seems to think so too. Online Versus is exclusively connected mode, which means you're almost always playing on routes. The game will occasionally offer a full 3-lap course as an option, but it's not consistent, and you still have to hope that the roulette will actually land on the track you voted for. For a while, people would select random as a bit of a workaround, because it would always choose a standard, non-route, 3-lap course. But Nintendo didn't like that, and patched it so random usually chooses one of the 3 routes they'd already offered to you. It's like they're saying,
Please, please, please play our connecting routes. We spent so much time making these. I'm sure there's something here you'll like.
It feels a little desperate. It's like they're confident in the work they've done, but afraid the players won't learn to appreciate it on their own. I think it's good to encourage players to see everything the game has to offer, but taking away options feels bad. If you don't like playing on routes, you're not going to want to play online anymore. But if you're not playing online, you won't grow to appreciate what the routes have to offer. But despite Nintendo's constant Nintendoing, I have a lot of respect for the routes themselves. They're the biggest shakeup to the formula this series has had in decades, so I think pushback is natural. Perhaps over time, once we've had a chance to fully enjoy the base tracks, we can better appreciate the variety that the routes bring. Maybe we'll see them more as standalone courses that connect the bigger ones, rather than worse versions of the tracks we actually want to play. Routes are the central pillar of Mario Kart World, and I'm so glad the devs were willing to do something so ambitious with a franchise that would make $1 bajillion whether they innovated or not. I just wish they'd executed it a little bit better.